tight schedule, and he has to be out of here in a few minutes. So we're going to ask your cooperation to please keep the aisles clear as possible so that we can have movement. The front area here for our public officials, please make sure. Can I have your attention, please? Can everyone please have your attention? I would like to present you our leader here at Medgar College, President Jackson, who will officially welcome the mayor to our college. President Jackson.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Medgar College family, to the young boys and girls in the audience, and to our friends of Medgar College, it gives me great pleasure, and it is a privilege to welcome all of you to this great occasion here at Medgar College. It gives me an enormous sense of pride to welcome the Honorable David N. Dinkins, the Mayor of New York City. And welcome you to our great college, Mr. Mayor. This is a great day, great evening for Medgar College and the Crown Heights community. As we celebrate Afro-American History Week, we celebrate those who made a major contribution to the development of this country. And Mr. Mayor, when you run the election, that was an historic moment for all of us. And it's also an historic moment for us that you have graced your presence here at Medgar College. We are indeed honored that you are here. And Mr. Mayor, you represent the best in the African American tradition. And certainly in keeping with the theme this evening, you are a testament to greatness. So we say to you, it is our honor that you are with us this evening. May we sit back and relax and enjoy this occasion. It is a historic moment for all of us. Mr. Mayor.
Dinkins was born 62 years ago under the sign of conscience of cancer in Trenton, New Jersey. He has made New York City his home since 1951. The first city, Miss Joyce Dinkins, and the mayor has two beautiful children, David Jr. and Donna Harvard, and a grandson, Jamal. Mr. Dinkins was elected to the second most influential job in the country after the president in 1989.
Mr. Dinkins served with valor in the Marine Corps. During World War II, at the time when he had to break through many barriers in order to enlist, he attended Howard University and received a bachelor's degree in mathematics. Mr. Dinkins enrolled in Brooklyn Law School at night and worked 2 jobs in order to maintain his family. Mr. Dinkins practiced law in Harlem 1956 to 1975. During this time, he served with distinction in the New York State Assembly, where he was responsible for the creation of the seed program to assist low-income students to attend college. Mr. Dinkins served for 1 year as president of the Board of Elections. He later became city clerk and served in that facility until being elected to the office of Manhattan Borough President, following in the great tradition of Percy Sutton. In the productive partnership between government and some of the city's most talented citizens, he was able to make tremendous strides in the area of the homeless, child welfare, pedestrians, health and environment, and the service needs for youth. He personally visited the troubled schools, bringing a positive message of excellence and commitment. Mr. Dinkins provided leadership in key urban issues and support for cultural organizations. His commitment for the rights and dignity for all people has been impressive.
Mr. Dinkins has been a voice of clarity and perception in matters of coalition building and racial harmony. He was spoken forcefully for Soviet Jewry and against the system of apartheid in South Africa. Mayor Dinkins has clearly demonstrated since entering office that he will be a voice for morality, freedom, and justice for all citizens of this city and the world. Mayor Dinkins will truly join a rich legacy of African world history. His recent letter of invitation to Nelson Mandela is just history. His recent letter of invitation is another example of his commitment carry on the rich tradition of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and many of other great African world leaders who dared to struggle for the establishment of a better world for all people. The mayor's dedication of this administration to the children is a true and shining example of the future of this city and the nation under his leadership and quest for excellence. The Honorable David M. Dinkins, our mayor, our father, our leader.
Does it make you feel good about the future? Dr. Jackson, distinguished president. Did you all know that Richard Green was a Marine too? Y'all know that? Okay. All right. That's why it's so bad, right? Mary Pinkett, old friend, I'm delighted to see you here. So many friends in this audience. I really wish that I didn't have someplace else to go, because I can sit here and just play with the children all night. I cannot tell you what it does for me, not only your warmth and the wonderful greeting and the gifts and whatnot. Of course I appreciate that, but I get the biggest bang out of the children. It really makes you feel good. And these are the children that we don't hear about, and it's so sad. Mary Pinkett was telling me a story just a little bit ago of a youngster that found a weapon and it was loaded and turned it in. Now it could have been a real tragedy behind that, and we'd all been wringing our hands and shaking our heads and so forth. But I cannot tell you what a beautiful sight. I wish all of you out there could come up here one at a time and look out and see everybody.
It's a gorgeous sight. If you want to take some real pictures, you take a picture of this audience. It is truly a great joy for me to participate in this celebration of African American History Month with the Crown Heights Youth Collective. My greetings to all of my distinguished friends in the legislature and distinguished community leaders. As far as I'm concerned, each of you is distinguished. There's none of you that is not. And I am just delighted to be here. You know, it was said some time ago, it is not so much a Negro History Week as it is a History Week. We should emphasize not Negro history, but the Negro in history. What we need is not a history of selected races or nations, but the history of the world void of national bias, race hate, and religious prejudice. That was said by Carter Goodwin Woodson, the father of modern African American historiography, and the founder of Black History Week, which we now celebrate as African American History Month. African American history seen in this context is a history of men and women like Nat Turner and Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth and Rosa Parks, men and women who fought injustice so that the history of this nation would someday be a history devoid of racial bias. Unfortunately, their dream has yet to be realized. The struggle for justice continues. We have come a long way, but our journey is not yet over. The Emancipation Proclamation outlawed slavery, but the shackles of racism and discrimination continue to hold back progress. The African American community must therefore continue to serve as a major force for progress in our nation. Setting a progressive agenda is not difficult. The issues are glaringly obvious. In many areas, the wisdom exists to solve the problems. The more difficult question is that of building the support necessary to implement an agenda for change. In order to continue to move forward, we must build coalitions with those who share our commitment to economic and social justice. We have seen the power of such coalitions. When we have come together, we have succeeded in advancing our struggle, and we have even made history. African Americans, Latinos, whites, Jews, Asians, women, and trade union activists came together in response to Dr. Martin Luther King's call to action. On August 28, 1963, Dr. King led his Coalition for Justice in the historic March on Washington. 8 months later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and discrimination was declared illegal across the land. Of course, something happened between that march and the time that President Johnson signed that bill, you see, because what happened was Dr. King went to the president and said, "Mr. President, we need civil rights legislation." And President Lyndon Baines Johnson said, "Dr. King, the time is not yet right." Dr. King replied, "We'll make the time right." And he did. You know, incidentally, that is exactly one of the reasons why it has taken so long to progress as far as we have in South Africa. Now, we got a ways to go. Let's understand, Nelson Mandela is out of jail, but he's not yet free. One of the reasons that they've been at a great disadvantage in South Africa is because of the blackout. With respect to, somebody said you ought to call it a whiteout, with respect to the media. Whereas in the South in the 60s, when Dr. King led his marches, what we had was bull corners and dogs and whips and hoses on television every night. And so the whole world became outraged at what was going on. It was so eminently unfair. There's no question about it. Well, things like that are happening in South Africa, have happened. But they've kept the news out. You know, for a long time, Nelson Mandela, you couldn't say his name, couldn't show his pictures, nothing. Jesse reports that for many years, all they got was porridge. Bread once a week, meat once a week. But with enormous dignity and great courage, Nelson Mandela has worn down those who sought to imprison him. He imprisoned them. I'm happy to report that Jesse Jackson delivered a letter to Nelson Mandela and to Winnie Mandela from me, and a letter to Winnie Mandela from my wife, inviting them to come to New York City, to City Hall and to Gracie Mansion, because he is an international leader and that's where he belongs. So, while we don't know yet the date, but there will come a time when Nelson Mandela will come to this country, and when he does, he certainly will come to New York, and when he does, we're going to have a real celebration. You know, it's interesting. Just the other day, I did I guess it was yesterday or the day before. The days sort of run together on me. But I did a television show beamed to about a dozen African countries, and there were people. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them, or at least I could hear a translator, because some of them spoke French, and they were congratulating me and saying nice things, and I went on to say that you in Africa have inspired us here, and it's true, because they have. I pointed out to them that it's just been in recent years, 30 years give or take, that we have begun to appreciate our heritage, and because we didn't before, not like we should have. And part of the reason was that we were brainwashed by the white community. Because when I said that, the newspaper reporters who were there noticed it, and then later they questioned me about it. And I said, yes, that is accurate. That is what I said. Because that is true. You see, when I was a little boy, and that was a very long time ago when I was little, let me tell you. Okay, look, I was born in 1927 now. That's, you know, long time. But you see, when they talked about Africa, people envisioned Tarzan or something. See, we didn't know of the grand and glorious heritage that is ours. We didn't understand about the civilizations along the Nile. We didn't understand those things then, but we know now. We know now, and there is great pride. And so I went on to point out to these reporters, I said, you know, frankly, this is nothing new. I have said it. Many people have said it before. That's, I guess, one advantage of being mayor. People pay more attention to what you say. But to take you back to the beginnings, back when Dr. King was here, there was a coalition in those days, and then some 20 plus years later, there were the beginnings of a new coalition inspired by the presidential campaign of the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson. Oh yes, in response to his call in 1984. In fact, it really was November of 1983, because I was there. And let me tell you, Jesse called for a rainbow coalition for the empowerment and registered more than 2 million people, many of whom voted for the very first time. 2 years later, in 1986, these voters made the difference in many key Senate races, and as a result, the Democratic Party regained control of the Senate. Now that, you know, you can say that in a sentence, and it may not sound too important, but let's understand what that means. Gain control of the Senate, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, you know, and therefore the nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court was denied. That's important. So, sometimes people will say it doesn't make any difference, why bother to vote anyhow and so forth, but those people, mainly in the South, who did vote in 1986, provided all of us here in the North and elsewhere with a different Supreme Court than we would otherwise have had. And if you stop and think and realize that the Supreme Court, the law is not what in the books, the law is what the Supreme Court says it is. So you must understand that. And it's tremendously important. That's why Roe v. Wade, the case that had to do with a woman's right to choose, so important. Because a lot of folks don't understand how important that is. But in 1988, what had began as the first stirrings of a rainbow coalition helped to create a new Democratic majority in the United States Senate, a majority that reflects the interests and needs of gays and African Americans, Latinos and Asians, peace and trade union activists, Jews, lesbians, persons with disabilities, all who shared in our society. In early 1989, Ron Brown became the first African American ever elected to chair of the Democratic National Committee. That's heavy. That's real power. And you know, we're trying to get the Democratic National Convention to come here in 1992. And it's down to two areas now, New Orleans and New York. It is said that we are the finalists. Now, the fact that Ron Brown is a brother doesn't mean it's coming to New York. The fact that Ron Brown grew up in Harlem in the Teresa Hotel where his father was the manager doesn't mean it's coming to New York. But it don't hurt. And let me tell you, if we get the convention here, it's not just balloons and banners and noise. It's economic development. It's money. It's dollars. That's what we're talking about. You know, about a month or so ago, I went to Washington to participate in a press conference with some members of the Democratic members of the Congress who had been elected in special elections, about 5 or 6 of them. And I was there as a Democrat elected, here in New York. And also there was Doug Wilder. Now, imagine what a wonderful feeling it was. See, Doug Wilder and I were at Howard University at the same time. So imagine me standing there with Doug. He's the governor, I'm mayor. But this time next year, we're going to have another governor. His name's Andrew Young in Georgia. Now, imagine, and I know that my staff is going crazy because I'm supposed to be speaking in Manhattan at 8 o'clock, but I'll be a little late. I'll tell them where I was. Very recently, Andrew Young was here in New York. I hosted a breakfast fundraiser for him. And imagine the joy that I had. Now, Andy and I were at Howard University together also. So I've known Andy a long time. And imagine the joy I had making a speech and presenting him and whatnot. Because the same Andy Young, when he was in the Congress, and I was struggling trying to get to be Manhattan Borough President, promised to help me. And I said, that's terrific, Andy, because he was highly visible, because he was with Carter when people were saying, who's Carter? Jimmy who? And he was there early, and so therefore he got quite a bit of projection as Carter became president. So he's in the Congress, and if he's going to walk the streets of Harlem with me, I know this is going to help me a great deal get elected. Well, lo and behold, the president named him ambassador to the United Nations. I said, oh my goodness, I'm happy for him. On the one hand, he's my friend, but I know that this distinguished ambassador cannot walk the streets of Harlem with his cap trying to get to be borough president. Well, he did. He didn't let it bother him one little bit. And when I got over the first 5 minutes of being a little self-conscious with this important ambassador out there in the street with me, and you know how Andy is. He's the same guy today as he was when I first met him around 1947 or 48. And so imagine what a wonderful feeling I have in being able to give back to him just a little bit of what he did for me. But he's going to get to be governor, and he's going to be a good governor. Andrew Young, Georgia. Our people in my election here last year, I said to them, vote your hopes and not your fears. And they did. They rejected the politics of division and endorsed the politics of inclusion. Reach out and bring folks in. A new progressive alliance united by a common agenda of economic and social justice has emerged. We have proven that a new majority exists and is growing strong enough to overcome economic polarization, racism, and despair. Through the combined power of voter registration and coalition building, we can win political power. With political power, we can advance the struggle for economic and social justice. Together, but only together, we can win. You know, let me just conclude with a couple of thoughts. When I was a little boy, indeed, even when I was in high school, we were told things like, don't you all be too pushy. I'm serious, that was the expression, don't be too pushy, because, you know, it takes a while for folks to change. And they would almost say things like, they only lynched 5 last year. I mean, it was considered a big deal. Look at what we were fighting for, the right to drink from the same fountain, to sit at the same counter, and on and on. When I was in the Marine Corps, Brother Green, hey, Senator, how are you? When I was in the Marine Corps, I was stationed at Montfort Point Camp Lejeune. And I had to go back, and sometimes I'd pass through Washington and get a bus, back down to North Carolina. And one day I stood in line for 2 hours. I mean, physically stand in line, queued up. And I got to the door of the bus. It was important. The reason you stand in line is if you're late getting back, you end up in the brig, right? You end up in brig is jail. You end up in jail. So finally, my turn, I got to the door, and the great big bus driver looked like he was 6'5", maybe he was only 6'1", but he had this 45 on his hip, which made him look taller. And he said, 2 more white seats. 2 more white seats. I'm in uniform, you understand? In theory, prepared to go die for my country. And when you think about things like that, and think about the ill treatment over time, and that's why now, with Mary Pinkett's help, we're going to push to get the legislation in our city council that will strengthen the laws and the loopholes with respect to corporations who do business with the city of New York that are still in South Africa. And I promise I won't be much longer, but I want you to get this point. You see, we have a law that says the city will not do business with you if you're a corporation that's still doing business in South Africa. Provided the city can get the same goods or services at a reasonable price elsewhere. Now, I don't think that's a heavy load, and that's law right now. However, there are some companies that have what we call non-equity ties to South Africa, non-ownership ties, and they circumvent our laws through licensing and franchising and distribution agreements. And that's the law that Mary and I are going to get amended so as to change it, to choke them off. Now, the reason it's significant tonight, and I talk about it now, is because people are saying, indeed, our president has suggested, a man named Herman Cohen, who is the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, suggested early on, the day after Nelson Mandela was released, that we ought to lessen our sanctions, ought to lighten up, as it were. Well, it's exactly the opposite that we need to do. And that's why we're going to press forward with this legislation. Because now is not the time to lighten up, now it's time to hunker down. I want to say the same thing that I just said in the words of Dr. King. How are you, Rabbi? Nice to see you. Now, what I just said about folks saying don't be too pushy and stuff like that, here's how Dr. King put it. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. Thank you all very much.
An African world philosopher, Malik El-Shabazz, presents this award to the Honorable David N. Dinkins, Mayor of the City of New York, in presentation with the Dr. Booker T. Washington Leadership Training Academy, Medgar College, February 21st, 1990. And this was the headlines on the Amsterdam News when he won the election. It says, as you see it, and we know he's an ardent tennis player, so we wanted to play tennis. On behalf of Mr. Chiapi, the principal of Prospect Heights, we have our Prospect Heights sweatshirt, we are one, and we want to have this also for when that other one gets a little sore, we can have something else to change into. Right here. We'd like to we know that the mayor is running behind schedule, but just for a brief moment, we'd like to just recognize the people who came here, the front audience, all the members of the Medgar College Council, all the staff and faculty, Ms. Graves, Mr. Chairman of Prospect Heights, my board members, Brother James, we want the president of the student government, Mr. Greg Myers, got our students from the council, and from the Booker T. Washington Leadership Training Academy, which is our training group here. We're training the leaders of tomorrow. We'd like to, excuse me? Oh, Sister Muhammad, Dr. Muhammad from Jackie Robinson School. Thank you. Thank you, and everyone else, if I miss anyone, please forgive me. We'd just like to, we know the mayor's running behind schedule, and we'd like to just thank Dr. Jackson, Mr. Cooper, and all the members of the security group, Stuber, and the staff, Mr. Boone, and the brothers back here, Senator Markowitz, and all the people. It's not finished yet. We wanted him to stay for a while, but we know he has to move. But we'd like to just thank everyone for coming out tonight, and please, okay, he wants to take a picture with the group. And the council will be meeting after we finish here in the library. When you know the council will be meeting, the chair will come and take a picture. And we have a lot of entertaining. We have something special that we prepared for the mayor tonight. We'll do it for him another time when we have real time. So we want you to see it. We did it specifically for Black History Month. So please, if you don't have to leave to go to class at your meeting, please stay and see the Prospect Heights High School dances after the mayor leaves. Our 21st senatorial leader here in our community. function at Prospect Hall in which all the business powers of Brooklyn and many from Manhattan were present, mostly Caucasian. 90% of those people didn't support David Dinkins. You can be assured, I want you to know, every one of you, that this mayor could have easily given a speech ignoring a lot of things, but in front of this audience of 45 minutes, he gave them an African-American history course of this nation, of this city, his experiences, to make each and every one of those business people understand the important contributions of African Americans yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I think all of us know we got one very special mayor here with us, that's for sure.
I need everybody's attention. Everyone, please have a seat.